The video call linked up at 9:43 that morning. Trevor Ashford's image took over my screen, his corner office framed behind him. Floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over downtown Seattle. Abstract art worth more than I made in a year. Every detail staged for effect. He wasn't alone. Claudia Winters from legal sat at his left, and Hammond Price, the CFO, sat at his right. Three faces watching me through my laptop camera while I sat in my home office, boxed in by stacks of merger paperwork and tax code printouts. That's when I understood. This wasn't a meeting about my findings. This was a takedown. "Morgan, we've reviewed your audit report," Trevor said. That particular blend of condescension, successful men perfect after years of never hearing the word no. "And frankly, we're concerned about your understanding of complex tax structures." I had just handed his team documentation of a $150 million tax liability buried inside their upcoming merger. A merger set to close in 48 hours, right before their IPO. An offering that would make Trevor and his executives absurdly rich, while the tax bomb I'd uncovered would eventually go off and take the whole company down with it. Before I go further, if this story is landing for you, your support matters more than you know as we push toward 2,000 subscribers. We just hit our first milestone together, and every subscription helps get more stories like this one made. The button's right there whenever you're ready. My name is Morgan Hale. Until that Thursday morning, I was the senior tax auditor at Whitmore & Associates, a mid-tier firm that specialized in merger and acquisition due diligence. I didn't come from money. My grandmother cleaned houses, my grandfather worked construction, and between them they scraped together enough to put my mother through community college. She ended up as a bookkeeper at a small manufacturing plant, and she taught me that numbers tell stories. Stories about honesty, about the choices people make, about the gap between what they say and what they do. I got into accounting because numbers came easily to me. I got into auditing because I was good at spotting what people wanted to bury. Not some innate talent. I learned it watching my mother catch discrepancies in payroll, fix errors that would have cheated workers out of their overtime, correct mistakes that could have wiped out someone's Christmas bonus. She taught me that getting the numbers right was never just about compliance. It was about protecting people who had no way to protect themselves. So when I found the hole in the Ashford-Meridian merger, and yes, the company's real name was Meridian Solutions, though that's the only place you'll see it, I wasn't chasing glory or trying to make trouble. I was doing my job. The same job I'd done flawlessly for 7 years, across 43 separate merger audits. Trevor leaned toward the camera. "Hammond has explained to me that your interpretation of the tax treatment is overly conservative. The structure we've created is industry standard for this type of asset acquisition." "It's not," I said quietly. "The asset transfer triggers recognition under Section 367. And the intellectual property valuation you're using to offset the liability is unsupported by any independent assessment. The IRS will." "The IRS," Trevor cut in, "will see what our tax attorneys present to them. Which is why we've decided to bring in a more experienced firm to complete the audit." "Hammond? What was the name?" "Fitzgerald and Chun," Hammond said, not even looking at me through the screen. "They've handled several billion-dollar mergers. They understand sophisticated tax planning." The message was obvious. I didn't get it. I was out of my depth. I was a problem being solved by swapping me for someone who'd sign off on whatever they wanted. "This isn't about sophistication," I said, keeping my voice steady even as anger built in my chest. "This is about a clear violation of." "Morgan." Trevor's smile went thin and sharp. "I'm going to be direct with you. You're a C-list accountant working for a C-list firm, trying to make a name for yourself by finding problems that don't exist. This merger has been reviewed by 3 separate law firms and 2 Big Four accounting consultants. Are you really suggesting that you found something they all missed?" "Yes." The word just sat there in the space between us. Claudia shifted in her seat. Hammond looked at something off camera. Trevor's smile disappeared. "Then you're either incompetent or deliberately sabotaging this deal. Either way, we're terminating Whitmore and Associates' engagement effective immediately. And Morgan, I'm going to be honest. I'll be having a conversation with your managing partner about your judgment. I suspect this might be your last audit." The screen went dark. They'd cut the call. 9:49 a.m. 6 minutes after it started. And I'd just been fired from the biggest engagement of my career by a CEO who'd called me C-list and threatened to end my future in the industry. I sat there looking at my own reflection in the blank screen. Behind me, mirrored in the black glass, sat the boxes I'd spent 3 weeks combing through. Tax returns, asset valuations, corporate structure charts, international transfer pricing agreements, thousands of pages telling one very clear story. Trevor Ashford was hiding a massive liability inside an illegal tax structure, planning to go public before anyone caught on, betting that by the time the IRS noticed, he'd already be a billionaire. My phone rang. Nathan Whitmore, my managing partner, picked up. Morgan, I just got off the phone with Trevor Ashford. He is extremely unhappy. He's threatening to not only refuse payment for our work, but to make sure every tech company in Seattle knows that we're not cooperative with innovative tax strategies. Nathan, the tax structure is illegal. I documented. You documented your opinion. An opinion that contradicts multiple other professional assessments. Morgan, I value your thoroughness. But there's thorough and then there's obstinate. Ashford is a major player in this market. We can't afford to. We can't afford to sign off on fraud. A pause. That's a very serious accusation. It's a very serious violation. Section 367 requires. I know what it requires. I also know that tax law has gray areas, and that different professionals can have different interpretations. Ashford is moving forward with Fitzgerald and Chan. They'll make their own assessment. Our engagement is over. I need you to box up all the documents and return them to the client. And if Fitzgerald and Chun signs off on the structure and the IRS audits them after the IPO, then Fitzgerald and Chun will deal with it. That's not our problem anymore. Except it was my problem. Because I'd seen it. I put it in writing. And if I just packed everything up and moved on to the next audit knowing that $150 million in tax liability was being hidden, what did that make me? My mother used to say the numbers don't care about your career. She meant integrity isn't up for negotiation. If the math shows someone's getting cheated, you say something no matter what it costs you. And I already knew the moment I decided to act, that this was going to cost me plenty. Nathan, I need to do what's right here. Another pause. Morgan, don't do anything rash. You're a good auditor. You have a future in this firm. But if you make this personal, if you go around making accusations about a client, I can't protect you. I understand. I hung up. 10:15 a.m. I pulled up my laptop and opened the email I drafted the night before. After my third pass through the tax structure, once it was clear this wasn't a gray area or an aggressive reading of the code. It was fraud, deliberate, calculated, built to deceive both the IRS and the future shareholders who'd buy into the IPO. The message was addressed to the IRS Examination Division, specifically the Large Business and International Unit that handles complex corporate tax matters. It laid out the tax structure in detail, cited the exact violations, and attached the documents proving the liability was real and was being deliberately hidden. It also carried my name, my credentials, my contact information. This wasn't an anonymous tip. This was me, Morgan Hale, CPA, staking my professional reputation on reporting fraud. My cursor hovered over send. This would end my run at Whitmore & Associates. It would probably make me unhireable at any firm doing business in Seattle's tech sector. Trevor Ashford was rich, connected, and vindictive. He'd make sure everyone knew I was the auditor who blew up a billion-dollar deal. But if I didn't send it, I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I stayed silent while people got hurt. That liability wasn't going to vanish. Eventually the IRS would find it anyway, and when they did, the company would come apart, shareholders wiped out, and the employees, the engineers and support staff who'd taken stock options instead of bigger paychecks, left holding the bag for Trevor's greed. I hit send. 10:23 a.m. Then I started duplicating everything, my work papers, my analysis, my calculations, saving copies to 3 separate drives, because I knew what was coming. Nathan would want it all deleted. Trevor's lawyers would claim I'd stolen confidential material. I needed to protect myself. The IRS answered faster than I expected. 11:07 a.m. An email from Senior Revenue Agent Kimberly Larson. Mr. Hale, we've received your referral regarding Ashford Technologies and the pending merger. The details you've provided warrant immediate investigation. We're issuing a formal inquiry to the company within the hour. Please be available for a phone call this afternoon to discuss your findings in detail. Also, be advised that as the reporting party in a potential fraud investigation, you may be entitled to whistleblower protections and awards under IRS guidelines. Whistleblower awards? I hadn't even considered that. The IRS pays out a percentage of recovered taxes to people who report major fraud, and on a $150 million case, that could be a serious number. Not that it mattered to me, I hadn't done this for money. I'd done it because my mother's voice in my head wouldn't let me do anything else. But that phrase "within the hour" was the part that actually mattered. Trevor's IPO was set to launch the next morning. The merger was supposed to close that night. If the IRS fired off an inquiry today, everything would grind to a halt. 11:48 a.m. My phone lit up like it was under attack. Not literally, but it felt that way. Calls from Nathan, from other partners at Whitmore, from numbers I didn't recognize, voicemails and texts all circling the same question. What did you do? Then an email from Trevor Ashford himself, copied to what looked like his entire legal department. Morgan Hale has engaged in a malicious and defamatory campaign to sabotage Ashford Technologies through false reports to regulatory agencies. We are pursuing all available legal remedies, including claims for tortious interference, defamation, and theft of confidential information. Mr. Hale will be held personally liable for all damages resulting from his reckless actions. I read it twice. The threat was plain. Trevor intended to ruin me. Lawsuits, professional complaints, personal liability. Resources deep enough to bury me in legal costs until nothing was left. My grandmother used to say bullies count on you being too scared to fight back. That they throw big threats because they're terrified of what happens if you don't flinch. I didn't flinch. I called my own lawyer, Angela Morrison, a former IRS attorney turned whistleblower defense counsel. I'd looked her up after finding the tax hole just in case. Angela, it's Morgan Hale. We spoke last week about a potential case. The Ashford situation. I saw the news. The IPO just got suspended. What? I pulled up my browser and typed in Ashford Technologies IPO. The headline landed like ice water. Ashford Technologies IPO halted, pending IRS investigation. The story was short. The SEC had frozen the offering pending resolution of material tax compliance questions the IRS had raised. The merger with the target company was now in question. Trading in pre-IPO shares had stopped, and Trevor Ashford had declined to comment. 12:11 p.m., less than 3 hours since Trevor called me a C-list accountant and fired me on a video call. And I'd just torn his whole plan apart. Morgan, you still there? Angela's voice pulled me back. Yeah, I didn't think it would move this fast. The IRS doesn't sit on 9-figure tax fraud. Especially not when someone hands them a fully documented case right before a company tries to go public. They probably already have a team tearing through the merger paperwork. And Morgan, Trevor Ashford's threat email, that's evidence of retaliation against a whistleblower. It actually strengthens your case. My case. For whistleblower protection and compensation. If the IRS recovers taxes based on your report, you're entitled to 15 to 30% of the collected proceeds. For a $150 million case, once you factor in penalties and interest, we could be looking at total recovery north of $200 million. Your share could land somewhere between $30 and $60 million. $60 million. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment and drove a car with 170,000 miles on it. My biggest financial goal up to that point had been saving for a condo down payment. And now I was staring down a whistleblower award that could rewrite my whole life. But that wasn't actually what I was thinking about. I was thinking about Trevor's face on that call, that smug certainty that he could dismiss me, threaten my career, and just keep going with the fraud because people like me weren't supposed to push back. Angela, what happens to Ashford Technologies? Honestly, the company might make it through this if they unwind the tax structure, pay what they owe, and restructure the merger. But the IPO is dead. No underwriters going near them until this gets sorted out, and that could take months, maybe years. Trevor and his executive team lose their payday. They could face personal liability if the IRS decides the structure was intentionally fraudulent. The company's reputation is wrecked. And the employees? They're the ones who take the biggest hit. Stock options that were supposed to make them wealthy are worthless now. Some will leave. The company will probably need layoffs just to cover the liability. That was the part that stuck with me, the engineers, designers, project managers who'd pulled 60-hour weeks building something real, expecting it to pay off when the company went public. None of it was their fault, and they'd be the ones paying for it. Is there a way to protect them? I asked. Not really. Corporate fraud always lands hardest on the people who didn't do it. The executives have other assets, other income streams. The employees just have their jobs and stock that's now worth nothing. I thought about my mother poring over payroll, making sure workers got what was owed to them. She couldn't fix the whole system, but she could look out for the people right in front of her. Angela, the whistleblower award, if I get it, can I use it however I want? It's your money. Why? Just thinking about options. The rest of the afternoon dissolved into phone calls. The IRS wanted a full interview, which I gave over 3 hours, walking Agent Larson through every piece of the tax structure. Nathan called to tell me I was terminated from Whitmore and Associates effective immediately, for a gross breach of client confidentiality and professional standards. I'd seen that one coming. What I hadn't expected was the call that came after. Morgan Hale. Yes. This is Bethany Cross from the Wall Street Financial Review. I'm writing a story about the Ashford Technologies IPO collapse. I understand you were the auditor who reported the tax issues to the IRS. Someone had leaked my name. Maybe someone at the IRS, maybe someone at Ashford hoping to paint a target on my back. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. I understand, but I wanted to get your response to Trevor Ashford's statement. What statement? He held a press conference 30 minutes ago. He claimed a disgruntled junior auditor fabricated tax issues to sabotage the company after being removed from the engagement for incompetence. He said you're facing legal action and professional sanctions. He's framing this as a personal vendetta, rather than a genuine compliance issue. C-list accountant. Incompetent. Disgruntled. Fabricated. Trevor was trying to torch my credibility before the truth caught up with him. Ms. Cross, I'm a licensed CPA with 7 years of audit experience and a spotless professional record. I reported documented tax violations to the appropriate regulatory authority after the client rejected my findings. Everything I reported is backed by the company's own records. Trevor Ashford can say whatever he likes, but the IRS has the evidence, and they'll reach their own conclusion. Can you provide any of that evidence? Not while the investigation is ongoing. But I stand by every word of my report. Her piece ran 2 hours later. Bethany had done her homework. She tracked down 3 other auditors who'd worked Ashford deals and were willing to say anonymously that Trevor had a habit of pressuring professionals into signing off on aggressive tax positions. She dug up 2 earlier IRS inquiries into Ashford subsidiaries, both settled quietly, and she'd quoted me accurately, framing the story as a whistleblower matter rather than the personal vendetta Trevor was pushing. The reaction was instant. Social media erupted over corporate tax fraud, whistleblower protections, the ethics of auditors. Some people called me a hero. Others called me a snitch who'd wrecked a company and cost people their livelihoods. Trevor's defenders were loud and relentless, flooding my LinkedIn with messages calling me jealous, incompetent, a failed accountant trying to tear down someone successful. I stopped reading after the first dozen. My grandmother's voice again. Don't wrestle with pigs, you both get dirty and the pig likes it. Instead, I put my energy into the IRS investigation. Over the following 3 weeks I supplied documents, testimony, and analysis. From the outside, I watched Ashford Technologies scramble to save itself. New tax advisors came in and confirmed exactly what I'd reported. They tried restructuring the merger to strip out the liability, but the target company walked. They went looking for alternate IPO underwriters, and nobody would touch them. Then the executives started leaving. Hammond Price, the CFO who'd sat silently on that call while Trevor called me C-list, resigned to pursue other opportunities. Claudia Winters, the general counsel, followed a week later. Trevor held his ground, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an incompetent auditor, until the IRS handed down its formal findings. The structure was fraudulent. The liability was real, and it had been deliberately concealed. Ashford Technologies owed $153 million in back taxes, plus $78 million in penalties and interest. Total, $231 million. The company didn't have it. They'd burned through their cash reserves on the merger and IPO prep. Their only paths forward were a fire sale to a bigger competitor or bankruptcy. They took the sale. A Silicon Valley giant bought them for a fraction of their old valuation, mostly for the technology and the talent. Trevor was pushed out as part of the deal. His equity stake gutted to almost nothing. The executives who'd backed the fraudulent structure got blacklisted. And the employees, the ones I'd been worried about, lost their stock options but kept their jobs under the new owners. It took 4 months for the IRS to close out the case. I spent those months living off savings and freelance bookkeeping. No accounting firm would touch me. Word in the industry was that I was toxic, too risky, too quick to run to regulators, not a team player. Trevor's version of events had traveled faster than the truth. There were plenty of nights I wondered if I'd made the right call, whether protecting my integrity was worth this kind of exile, whether there'd been some compromise I could have found that wouldn't have blown everything up. But every time my thoughts drifted that way, I'd land back on Trevor's face on that call. The absolute certainty that he could commit fraud and never face a consequence because people like me didn't matter. And I'd hear my mother again. The numbers don't care about your career. The IRS Whistleblower Award came through on a Tuesday morning. Angela called at 7 a.m. Morgan, the determination letter just came through. The IRS collected $231 million from Ashford Technologies. Your award is calculated at 24% of collected proceeds. That's $55.4 million. $55,400,000 for doing the job I was already supposed to do, for refusing to shut up when I saw fraud. There will be taxes, obviously, Angela went on, and my fee is contingent at 20% of the award. But net, you're looking at approximately $33 million. $33 million. Generational money. Enough that I'd never need to work again, never have to worry about a bill, never have to care that the accounting industry had blacklisted me. Morgan? You still there? Yeah. I'm just processing. There's something else. The IRS is putting out a public statement about the case. They're using it as an example of a whistleblower cooperating successfully. Your name will be public. There's no way around that. Will that help or hurt? Both. The accounting industry might keep seeing you as a troublemaker, but companies looking for compliance officers, forensic accountants, expert witnesses, they'll see someone with integrity who can't be pushed around. You'll have options. Different ones than before. Different but options. The IRS statement went out that afternoon, praising the vigilance and professional courage of the reporting individual, and stressing that whistleblowers were essential to tax enforcement. They left my name out of the official release, but 3 news outlets had it within the hour. After that, everything erupted. My phone ringing nonstop with reporters, recruiters, people wanting interviews, people wanting to tell me about corporate fraud they'd seen and never reported. But the call that mattered came 2 days later. Morgan Hale. Yes. My name is Francine Elliott. I'm the founder and CEO of Elliott Industries. We're a manufacturing company based in Tacoma. We're about to go through a major expansion and we need a chief compliance officer, someone who understands tax law, can't be pressured, and actually gives a damn about doing things right. Your name has been suggested to me by several people. Would you be interested in discussing it? A real job. Not freelance bookkeeping, not one-off consulting. An actual position with real authority and real resources behind it. What kind of manufacturing? Automotive parts. We supply components to 3 major manufacturers. Annual revenue around $800 million. We're family-owned, we've been around 40 years, and we've never had a tax problem because we're boring and honest. But we're moving into international markets, and international tax law is complicated. We need someone who can navigate it without cutting corners. Boring and honest. That sounded exactly right. I met Francine the following week at Elliott Industries headquarters. A no-frills building in an industrial park that smelled like machine oil and coffee. No floor-to-ceiling windows, no abstract art, just an office where people actually built things. Francine was in her late 50s, dressed practically, no jewelry apart from a watch that looked like it had survived a few decades. She sat across from me in a conference room, a whiteboard covered in production schedules behind her. I read everything about the Ashford situation, she said, no preamble. Trevor Ashford is still claiming you sabotaged him out of spite. Half the accounting world thinks you're a whistleblower hero. Half thinks you violated client confidentiality. So I need to know, did you do the right thing? Yes. Even though it cost you your career? It cost me one career. Apparently I'm starting a different one. Francine smiled. My father started this company with a loan and a handshake. He taught me reputation takes decades to build and seconds to destroy. We've lasted 40 years because we deliver quality parts on time. And we don't cheat on our taxes or our customers. I need a compliance officer who shares those values. Someone who'll tell me when we're about to do something stupid, even if I don't want to hear it. That's exactly what I told Trevor Ashford. It didn't go well. Trevor Ashford is currently being sued by his own shareholders and investigated by the SEC. You're sitting here with a $55 million IRS award and multiple job offers. I'd say it went very well, just not the way he planned it. She offered me the job. Chief Compliance Officer, competitive salary, equity in the company, and most importantly, a direct reporting line to her with the authority to shut down anything that crossed a regulatory line. I said yes. Over the next 2 years I built Elliott Industries' compliance program from the ground up. International tax structures that were boring and fully legal. Transfer pricing that followed every rule. Documentation solid enough to survive any audit. When Francine's son floated the idea of an offshore subsidiary to shave down tax liability, I laid out exactly why it was a bad idea, and she backed me. No drama. No calls where I got fired on camera. No IRS investigations. Just steady, ethical work that let the company grow without cutting corners. The whistleblower money, $33 million net, after taxes and legal fees, mostly sat untouched. I bought a modest house, gave to organizations that support whistleblowers, and set up a fund for accounting students from working-class backgrounds, people who reminded me of where I'd started. But there was one more thing I wanted to do. I reached out to Ashford Technologies' HR department, now folded into the acquiring company, and asked for a list of employees who'd lost stock options in the collapse. 327 people who'd been promised equity that ended up worthless. I put $5 million from the award into a trust fund, and each of those 327 employees received a payment scaled to their original option grant. Not enough to make them whole, but enough to acknowledge they'd gotten caught in something they had no part in creating. Most of them never learned who was behind it. The trust stayed anonymous, though a handful figured it out, and the emails started coming. I don't know if you're the person behind this, but if you are, thank you. I was going to lose my house when the options went worthless. This payment covered 6 months of mortgage while I figured things out. My daughter's college fund was based on those stock options. Your gift meant she could stay enrolled. I can't thank you enough. I worked at Ashford for 7 years and believed in what we were building. When it collapsed, I felt like I'd wasted my career. But knowing that someone cared enough to help us, it restored something. Thank you. Those messages meant more to me than the award money, more than the job at Elliott Industries, more than watching Trevor Ashford eventually settle the shareholder lawsuits and vanish from the business world. Because the truth was, reporting Trevor's fraud was never about revenge or money, or even some abstract sense of ethics. It came back to the same lesson my mother taught me: checking payroll for errors. Numbers represent people, and getting them right means protecting the people who can't protect themselves. Trevor had built his empire on fraud that would have eventually wrecked hundreds of lives. Employees losing their jobs, shareholders losing their savings, competitors undercut by illegally lowered tax costs. And he'd bet on people like me staying quiet, choosing our careers over doing what was right. He made 2 mistakes. First, he underestimated a C-list accountant from a C-list firm. Second, he never learned what my grandmother taught me about bullies: they count on you being too scared to fight back. A year after the award came through, I got an email from Bethany Cross, the reporter who'd broken the original story. Morgan, I'm writing a follow-up piece on the Ashford collapse and its aftermath. Would you be willing to be interviewed? On the record this time. I sat with it. The safe move was to say no, let the story fade, focus on my new career and my new life. But silence is how bad actors keep winning. Silence is what turns fraud into business as usual and whistleblowers into cautionary tales instead of examples worth following. I said yes. Bethany came out to Elliott Industries headquarters. We sat in the same conference room where Francine had hired me, And I walked her through all of it, finding the fraud, the call where Trevor fired me, the decision to go to the IRS, the 4 months of professional exile, the eventual vindication. Do you regret it? Bethany asked. You could have stayed quiet, kept your job at Whitmore and Associates, moved on to the next audit. Would that have been easier? Easier isn't the same as better. But you suffered. You were fired, blacklisted, threatened with lawsuits. Was the principal worth the personal cost? I thought back to that call, Trevor's face so certain of his own power, the casual cruelty of calling me C-list, threatening my career, assuming I didn't matter. The cost wasn't optional, I said. The moment I saw that fraud, I had a choice: be complicit or report it. There was no middle path where I kept both my career and my integrity. So the real question was never whether the principal was worth the cost. It was whether I could live with myself if I chose silence instead. And now, with the award, the new job, the vindication, do you feel like you won? I feel like I did what my mother taught me. Get the numbers right even when it's hard. The fact that it worked out doesn't make it a win. It just makes it survivable. The piece ran the following month. Fair, balanced, thorough. Bethany talked to former Ashford employees who'd received payments from the anonymous trust, some of them guessing correctly where the money had come from. She talked to tax attorneys who called the case a textbook example of fraud that never should have gotten as far as it did. And she talked to Trevor Ashford, who still insisted he'd done nothing wrong and that I'd destroyed a company purely out of spite. Public opinion never landed on a single verdict. Some people would always see me as a hero, others would always see me as the person who cost a bunch of workers their jobs. That was fine. I hadn't done any of this for public opinion. I'd done it because my grandmother cleaned houses, my grandfather worked construction, and my mother caught payroll errors, and all three of them taught me the same lesson. Integrity isn't optional, even when it's expensive. 3 years after that call, Elliott Industries finished its international expansion. We operated across 7 countries, every one of them with a tax structure that was legal, documented, and built to survive an audit, not because we were scared but because that's how you build something meant to last. Francine called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. Morgan, I wanted to tell you before the announcement goes out. I'm retiring next year. My son is taking over as CEO, and we'd like you to join the board of directors. A board seat, real authority, a real voice, a real say in how the company operated. On one condition, I said. Francine raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating? The compliance officer position reports directly to the board, not the CEO. Non-negotiable independence. If your son wants to get aggressive with taxes or regulations, the compliance officer needs to be able to shut it down without worrying about getting fired for it. You're building a system that protects whoever comes after you. I'm building a system that protects the company and the people who work here. I won't be compliance officer forever, but whoever holds that job needs the power to actually do it right. Francine smiled. Done. Welcome to the board. That evening I drove home through the industrial parks and no-nonsense buildings that make up Tacoma's manufacturing district. No floor-to-ceiling glass, no abstract art, just places where people made real things and went home to real families. My phone buzzed with an email. Another accounting student asking about the whistleblower case, wondering whether to report something they'd found during their internship. I get these fairly regularly now. I pulled over and called them. 18 years old, interning at a regional accounting firm, had found what looked like expense report fraud committed by a partner. Scared to report it, scared not to. What would you do? They asked. Document everything. Report it through the proper channels, your supervisor first, then the firm's ethics hotline if that doesn't go anywhere. Understand that doing the right thing might cost you the internship. But understand that staying quiet costs you something too. The ability to look at yourself and know you had integrity when it counted. But what if I'm wrong? What if it's not really fraud? Just something I don't understand yet? Then you'll learn something. But if you're right and you stay quiet, people get hurt. That's the weight you'll be carrying. Only you can decide if your career's worth that weight. They thanked me and hung up. Maybe they'd report it, maybe they wouldn't. That was their call to make, their life, their integrity to build or trade away. But I told them what I wish someone had told me before that call with Trevor Ashford. That doing the right thing usually costs you in the short term, but staying silent costs you forever. I drove home to my modest house in a neighborhood where people mow their own lawns and fix their own cars. The whistleblower money sat in accounts doing boring, sensible things: index funds, municipal bonds, scholarships for kids from families like mine. No yacht, no penthouse, nothing to prove I'd won, because winning was never the point. The point was building a life I could be proud of, funded by money I'd earned by refusing to go along with fraud. Trevor Ashford had called me a C-list accountant. He meant it as an insult, a way to shrink me down and wave off my findings. But he was right in a way he never understood. I was C-list. I was never going to make partner at some prestigious firm, or live a luxury lifestyle, or land on the cover of a business magazine. I was going to do steady, honest work. I was going to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I was going to sleep at night knowing that when I found $150 million in tax fraud, I reported it, even though it cost me everything I'd built. And 3 years later, I'd built something better. Before we wrap up, if this story resonated with you and you haven't subscribed yet, it would genuinely mean a lot as we work toward 2,000 subscribers. Every subscription helps bring more stories like this one to you. The button's there whenever you're ready. My name is Morgan Hale. And this is how I learned that the most important audit you'll ever run isn't of a company's books. It's of your own integrity, the moment you're forced to choose between what's easy and what's right. The CEO laughed at my $150 million audit finding. He called me C-list and fired me over video chat. By lunchtime, his IPO had collapsed. But that's not the victory. The victory was knowing that 327 employees got help when their stock options turned worthless. That a company learned to value real compliance over clever tax maneuvering. That somewhere, an 18-year-old accounting intern might report fraud because they read about someone who did it and came out the other side. Trevor Ashford thought power meant never facing consequences. He learned that the C-list accountant had power too, the power to tell the truth and let the consequences land wherever they were going to land. Sometimes truth is expensive, but silence costs more.